Welcome to the Brittany Hughes Show. I'm Brittany Hughes. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have got a lot to talk about and very little time to talk about it in. So I am going to just kind of jump right in here because it's a 30-minute podcast. I don't even know that I'm going to have time to get to it today. But I want to talk about the Russia-Ukraine issue. I've been waiting to talk about it so bad because, of course, it has just been dominating the news cycle. And I think that there are some major issues that have not been discussed nearly enough. So this is a little bit of a different topic for me. And there's a reason for that. There's actually two reasons for that. So first of all, if you notice, I have not really discussed this issue very much. I haven't discussed it on Reality Check. I haven't written a whole lot about it. A lot of that is because this is a very dense, gigantic subject that can be talked about from a lot of different angles and does involve some nuance. And unless I'm going to really give a story the time and the air that it deserves, I don't want to do it a disservice. The second reason I don't typically talk about this kind of thing, as many of you know who have followed me on social media for a while now, my husband is active duty military. So this kind of crosses the line a little bit into what he does and the commitment that he has made and that our family has made. And so I want to be respectful of that position. At the same time, current events have kind of necessitated that we talk about this. And again, like I said, I think that there are some particulars that really need to be focused on here as everybody tries to figure out A, what's going on, B, why should they care, and C, what are we going to do about it? What should be done about it? So the first thing that I kind of want to address is the why should we care? At the moment, the latest is the Russian invasion of Ukraine has begun. I cannot vouch for what's going to happen 30 minutes from now. I cannot vouch for what's going to happen tonight or tomorrow. But as of right now, that is where we stand. And a lot of people, particularly on the right, are asking, why should Americans care? Why should Americans care about Ukraine's national sovereignty when we don't even seem to care about our own? We have a southwest border that is leaking like a spaghetti strainer, and the Biden administration has no plans whatsoever to do anything about it. We have more problems on the domestic front than we know what to do with. We have a flagging economy. We have a vice president that can't be anywhere, isn't anywhere to be found. Of course, then again, that might not necessarily be a bad thing. We have a lot of domestic issues that the Biden administration is flat out ignoring, or at worst, completely bungling. Spending is absolutely out of control. Why should we care that a country in Europe is being invaded by another country in Europe? Why is that our problem? As sad as it might be, why is that our problem? So that, I think, is a very fair question to ask. A lot of Americans are extremely upset with what's going on at home. We have massive inflation. Americans' grocery bills are going up. They're paying more at the pump. Those are the things that Americans are concerned about right now in real time. At the same time, it is also understood that there are no shortage of absolutely heinous things happening all around the world that we cannot get involved in, that we choose not to get involved in, that we don't have the resources to get involved in. It is terribly sad when a sovereign nation is invaded by a hostile neighbor, but it's also terribly sad that the Uyghurs are being slaughtered in China and we just let them host the Olympics. It's terribly sad that Nigerian Christians are still being slaughtered by militant Muslims and nobody seems to care. At the risk of sounding callous, horrible things are happening all around the world. People are being oppressed and their rights violated all around the world. And we simply do not have the capacity to right every single wrong. So I think that it is fair to ask why it should matter to the everyday American that Ukraine is being invaded by Russia. My answer is absolutely it matters and absolutely you should care. And there are tangible reasons for that. Ukraine is not simply another country being invaded. There is a strategy here that is playing out in a long game that is absolutely going to impact America down the line. And it necessitates our caring now. So let's talk first of all about Vladimir Putin. So Vladimir Putin is a communist dictator who kills his own people, oppresses political dissidents, completely stomps on human rights, is a narcissistic egomaniac bent on essentially global domination in one form or another. This is a guy who rose to power after the Russian apartment bombings in 1999, where he essentially came in, saved the day, and ended up usurping power following that tragedy. It is now widely understood that he most likely orchestrated those bombings himself in order to gain power. This is a guy who is literally willing to blow up his own citizens for power. He wants to restore his country to its former pre-Cold War glory days. And he is willing to sacrifice untold numbers of innocent people, including his own, in order to do it. We have seen this movie before. And the last time it played out on a European theater, it did not go well for the world or for the United States of America. Now, Russia, on top of being led by a narcissistic egomaniac, is also a tangible existing threat to the United States, both militarily. They have nukes. That is always a cause for concern. But they are also an incredibly destabilizing force in the Middle East. They prop up regimes like Bashar al-Assad's in Syria. They are strategically allied with our enemies, including Iran and China. So they have vested interests in nations that hate us, in nations that are tacitly at war with us. The other thing that makes Russia different and that makes them such a massive threat is something that I don't think is talked about or widely understood enough as it should be, and that is their cyber hacking capabilities. Moscow is known to be the cyber hacking capital of the world. As a matter of fact, Microsoft said that in 2021, Russia was responsible for 58% of all detected state-sponsored hacks, and that the vast majority of them targeted government agencies and think tanks. 74% of all ransomware revenues go to Russia-linked hackers. They are good at it. And the reason that this matters so much is I think that there's kind of a bit of a misperception that wars today and in the future are still going to be fought in traditional methods, that it's going to be boots on the ground, it's going to be military versus military, it's going to be guns blazing, kind of what you think of when you think of war. You think of the first, 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. That's not going to be the way that wars are fought, at least initially, in the future. Cyber warfare is going to become, and already is, a massive component of international conflict. It's not necessary to wash up on a foreign country's soil and try to take them by military force when you can simply, at the flick of a switch, cut off their power grid. When you can attack their internet, when you can shut down their oil pipelines. That is going to become a major weapon in future wars, and Russia is one of the best in the world at it. And that is a massive kind of silent, invisible threat that we don't necessarily feel in our day-to-day, but is important to remember when we talk about why we should care about Russian expansion across Europe. Consider this. If you live on the East Coast, particularly, you may recall last year when the Colonial pipeline was hacked. Do you remember that? So Colonial Pipeline emanates out of Houston, Texas, and it delivers a lot of the oil to the Atlantic coast. And in May of last year, you may recall, so many fuel stations started literally running out of gasoline. They could not get shipments of gasoline. Cars were lined up for hours trying to get gas for several days. People literally could not get to work in parts of where I lived at the time because they could not fill up their cars with gasoline. Entire fuel stations were empty. One Russian group called DarkSide was responsible for that entire catastrophe. In fact, the hack itself only lasted a few hours before a multi-million-dollar ransom was paid, but the amount of time that it took to get the pipeline back up and running took several days. One hack, one Russian group. So you see the chaos that can ensue with cyber attacks, and again, Russia is one of the best in the world. Now, when you're talking about a threat that massive, when you're talking about a country that poses that much of a threat, it's also important to recognize when they are acquiring things that could strengthen that threat. Russia continues to acquire geography, people, and resources, and their strength and their leverage is going to increase. So let's talk about Ukraine for a second, because it's not like Ukraine is just their westerly neighbor and, Putin has run out of land and he wants to take over Ukraine so that he can build some condos. That's not what Ukraine is. This is not just another nation. This is not just another military skirmish between two countries that we shouldn't care about. And it's not just that we feel so terrible for the Ukrainian people because their country is being invaded. Again, as bad as that is, and as much as that might suck, terrible things happen the world over. However, Ukraine is important for several reasons. First and foremost, being the fact that they are incredibly rich in natural resources. They also are home to about 1.1 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. They are second only in the world to Norway. Some of the world's largest deposits of coal, iron, and titanium are in Ukraine. They are the fifth largest exporter globally of iron ore. They are also a major producer of corn, seed oils, and wheat. You may not know this, but the wheat that comes from Ukraine ends up in your breakfast cereal. Again, this is kind of one of those silent connections that sort of makes the idea of isolationism, as much as I know some people like to espouse that as kind of the ideal method for dealing with these things. We should just care about us. We should care about what's going on at home and throw everything else out the window. What does it matter what goes on in the rest of the world? We need to be concerned with America only. As much as that may sound good on paper, that is simply not, that ship has sailed. There's absolutely no way to do that anymore. We are so globally interconnected, if no other way than economically, that it's such a massively tangled spider web at this point. Isolationism and simply closing our eyes and plugging our ears and only caring about what happens within our own borders is not realistic, because what happens overseas impacts what happens within our own borders, all the way down to your breakfast cereals. So when you consider Russia acquiring Ukraine, they get all of that with it. And the more natural resources they get, the more exports they gain control over, the more power and leverage they have to exert a vice grip on the rest of Europe, on our allies, and on the United States. And by the by, this also signals to China, to Iran, to North Korea, a message about Western resolve when a nation decides to expand into another sovereign nation, take them over, take all of their resources, and little to nothing is done about it. Now, that leads, of course, into the natural question, what can we do about it? And unfortunately, the Biden administration has put us in a position where we have far fewer options than we should. So the first question that obviously comes up is a military response warranted? There is very little public support on both the left and the right for a military response to a Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am of the mindset that that is fair. Again, like I said before, my husband is active duty military. You do not have to tell me how families are impacted by war. I know full well. It would impact our family in a very tangible way, in a way that it wouldn't impact a lot of other people. And then it would impact other families in a far more tangible way. Many of our closest friends would be directly impacted, their families directly impacted. When I say that I don't want to go to war with anybody, believe you me, I am deadly serious. War and military responses should only be used as a last resort. This is why it is so frustrating when President Biden came out after the absolutely atrociously bungled Afghanistan withdrawal and basically dismissed the death of 13 service members at the Hamid Karzai airport as, yes, that's tragic. Yes, we're sorry that they lost their lives, but they knew what they were getting into. That is such a dismissive way of talking about American lives that are not expendable and should not just be sent willy-nilly into any conflict as though that doesn't matter and their families don't matter, because we do. So I don't think that a military response here is warranted. I don't think that we are anywhere near that point. However, there are things that the American that the United States can do in terms of sanctions. The unfortunate part is Putin understands that we are domestically in a bad position to have any leverage over him whatsoever. We talked a little bit before about oil and why oil is so incredibly important to Russia. So Russia actually exports about 10% of the world's oil. The United States imports between 12 and 26 million barrels of Russian oil per month based on 2021 numbers. About 10% of our oil comes from Russia. There is no reason for this other than willfulness on our part. The United States is currently sitting on more oil than any other country on the planet, including Russia, including Saudi Arabia. Rystad Energy actually estimates that we are sitting on about 264 billion barrels of oil. That's stretched across our proven oil reserves, our probable oil reserves, and the ones that they estimate are there but haven't been found yet. 264 billion barrels of oil. The United States could not only be energy independent, we could be energy secure, and we could also be in a position to subsidize Europe if Russia were to ever cut off oil in response, in retribution for sanctions against them. That's their ace in the hole, and they know it. They know Americans don't want to pay more at the pump because we already are. They know that Biden is not in a position politically to ask Americans to pay more at the pump. He knows that our inflation is already sky high. He understands that there is absolutely no appetite or willingness in this country for people to pay more for goods and services and gas to put in their car because they are already paying exorbitant prices. He understands that. Why do you think he waited until this moment to make his move? And the only reason that the United States is not in an energy secure position to respond, where we are not dependent on Russian oil, where them cutting off the faucet would not impact the price at the pump in this country or potentially even in Europe, is because we have left oil sitting in the ground to appease the hemp chewers in this country who put plants above people. The Biden administration has kowtowed to progressives and waged an all-out war on the energy industry since the day he came into office. On day one, he halted the Keystone Pipeline, which, side note, by the way, in case you have missed it, MRC-TV produced a fantastic mini documentary about the Keystone Pipeline. It's called Killing Keystone. You can go on our website and watch it, or our YouTube page. Phenomenal mini documentary detailing the Keystone Pipeline throughout the Trump administration, and then how it was absolutely slaughtered on day one of the Biden administration, and how it has impacted the people in the states that the pipeline was to run through. Fantastic mini documentary. I cannot recommend it enough, but it didn't just impact the people in those states, as bad as it is. It also impacts the entire country by leaving us vulnerable to this kind of energy exploitation by our enemies. The Biden administration has also is raising the rates for oil companies to drill on federal land. So it's already expensive for them to do so. Now it's going to be even more expensive. They're going to pass that cost right on to the consumer at the pump. As a matter of fact, even as the Russia-Ukraine crisis was heating up, on Tuesday, not Tuesday of last week, last month, last year, last Tuesday of this week, The Biden administration actually halted new leases to drill for oil and natural gas on federal land in half a dozen states because a judge said that he was not happy with the way that the administration was calculating the cost of climate change to charge these companies for federal drilling. So in response, the Biden administration has put a temporary, at least, halt on new leases to drill for oil. Let that sink in for a minute. We have a conflict happening in Europe that is liable to drive up the cost of gas for average Americans because Russia has us by the short and curlies because we have completely failed at energy independence. We were on our way to that under Trump. It has been completely annihilated under the Biden administration. They now have leverage on us, and instead of immediately turning on the spigot and ensuring that we are energy independent, Biden should be ramping up oil production in this country in response and in preparation to keep this from hitting Americans in the wallet. And instead, he's halting leases on oil companies. He is still waging war on our own energy independence, even in the face of a conflict that's going to drive up gas prices for his people. This is how deluded the left has become. Gas prices rose 40% in the first 6 months of the Biden presidency. They continue to rise to this day. We do not have enough oil in our reserves to last very long. It's estimated that we have about enough oil to last a grand total of 97 days in our oil reserves. And yet the Biden administration continues to kowtow to environmental activists, even as experts are predicting that gas could very easily rise to $5 or even $7 a gallon very soon in response to this conflict. The other way that the Biden administration has completely brought us to our knees and has rolled out the red carpet for Russia to do exactly what they're doing is the war on the economy. Inflation has hit 40-year highs and is not slowing down anytime soon. 7.5% inflation. The cost of goods and services has skyrocketed. You couple that with the shipping delays and supply chain crises that have left literally grocery shelves empty. Here's a photo of a grocery store right down the street from me that I took about a month ago, showing the entire produce and meat aisles completely empty. This is what Americans are facing at home. And this was propagated at least a bit by stimulus checks and prolonged federal employment that was extended through COVID as the left continued to just ram a pandemic down everybody's throats in an effort to continue to seize power. And now we are not in an economic position at all to respond to Russia, and they know that. They know that there is no appetite whatsoever for Americans to be paying more. And they're going to use that. So again, all of this kind of comes back to what could have been done to prevent this? Because at the moment, we are in a position where we don't have very many good options moving forward without incurring a great cost to ourselves. Whether a great cost in the short term, by sucking up the higher price of goods, by throwing down sanctions on Russia and risking them retaliating, or simply letting them invade Ukraine, telling them, heck, go for it, I don't really care, and then dealing with the long-term ramifications down the road. I think that this proves how incredibly wrong the left was, shocker, I know, when it comes to Trump's America First policy. Trump was 100% right to put America first because he understood that only when America is strong domestically are we in a position to be strong on the world stage. Imagine if the United States was currently energy independent, energy secure, able to facilitate the export of oil and liquefied natural gas, of which we are the world's biggest exporter, by the way, and could do even more, to Europe, to supplement if Russia decides that they want to halt their exports. It would not only put us in a position of strength, it would also bolster our economic situation by creating jobs and revenue for us. Couple that with if we were strong economically and able to withstand a few extra cents at the pump if we had to. If gas was $1.20 a gallon instead of $4.20 a gallon, imagine if that were the case. I would wager that we wouldn't even be in this situation in the first place. Putin would not have seized this moment. And even if he had, we would be in a better position to respond. Trump knew that. And I find it extremely interesting that the left, for all their hemming and hawing about how Trump was pro-Russia and trying to establish this connection between Trump and Putin, and that Trump was just Putin's puppet, and that he was doing Moscow's bidding, and that he was in bed with the Russians, all the way down to, idiotic things like the Steele dossier about how Trump went to a, hotel in Moscow and was peed on by some Russian hookers. I mean, you remember the insanity that we dealt with trying to establish a connection between Trump and Russia. When in fact, it's the Biden administration that has rolled out the red carpet for Russian expansion across Europe for them to gain more power, for them to gain more resources and gain more leverage. The most pro-Russia thing that you can do is to weaken the United States of America. And that is exactly what the Biden administration has done from day one. There is absolutely no denying that he has picked this moment. He invaded Crimea under Obama. We saw virtually nothing from Russia except what the media made up from 2016 through 2020. And now he has decided to make his move under Biden because Biden sort of has this mentality of speak brashly but carry a toothpick. Say what you want about Donald Trump and the way that he talked about Vladimir Putin. Again, going back to my first point, Vladimir Putin is a narcissistic egomaniac who cares far more about how he looks and what is thought of him than he should. I mean, this is a guy who actually thinks that taking a bunch of pictures of himself riding shirtless on a horse through the daisies makes him look good. Say what you want about how Trump may have talked about him. I think Trump understood, again, going back to my first point, Putin is a narcissistic egomaniac and a bully. And I think Trump understood that the last thing that you do with a narcissistic egomaniac bully is to continue to taunt him. So when Trump came out and said, he's a good guy, he loves his country, blah, 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 and actually gave him a tip of the hat sometimes, I don't think that it was out of true admiration for Putin. I think there was an understanding of what Putin wanted, and that stroking his ego was in some way a way to kind of help keep him in check. Again, I'm not saying that it was the be-all, end-all. I'm not saying that that's why Putin didn't invade under Trump. But I think that Trump understood how you deal with people who need to be seen a certain way, who need to feel that they are respected. It may not sound good to the freedom-loving American ear, but if you look in comparison to what Biden has done, with the constant insults, calling people morons, calling, hey man, you're a lying dog-faced pony soldier, whatever, all of these insults that he likes to sling around, and standing there on videos posted to social media with his little chest puffed out at the Oval Office saying, Putin doesn't want to go toe-to-toe with me, and then having absolutely nothing with which to back it up. That is the exact opposite of how you deal with someone who is looking for a certain position, or at least the sense of one on the world stage. And again, to continue to challenge somebody like this, but to have no position of strength with which to back it up, is just an incredibly stupid move. We are in this position because the left has continued to kowtow to the progressive movement, has continued to wage war on its own nation, and put us in a bad domestic position to be able to respond. We are in this mess now, trying to figure out what the heck is going on and what we're going to do about it. And we are going to have long-term ramifications down the road. And it is because of the Biden administration. It is because Biden has put Russia in a position with which to leverage their strength by giving up our own. We should have never been here in the first place. And it is absolutely incumbent upon us to try to learn a lesson here that taking care of ourselves first is the critical first step to allowing us to be in a position to respond to these kinds of threats when they come up, to be in a position to respond when other nations call on us to help. And we are not in that position, and it is because of the left. And anything that happens from here on out as a ramification of this is on their shoulders. It is completely on their shoulders. So we're going to be following this as it continues to develop. This story is so far from over. I kind of shudder to think where it's going. As a matter of fact, I don't think that we're going to see gas prices go down anytime soon. Let's just put it that way. But we are going to be back here talking next Thursday. Make sure that you go online and download our episodes let's see, we are on Amazon Music, Odyssey, Spotify, Deezer, and iHeartRadio currently. Some of you have asked why we're not on iTunes and Google Podcasts yet. So iTunes and Google Podcasts actually have a policy where they will not make a new show public until you upload the first couple of 3 episodes. So we're working on that. We're going to get confirmation. Should be in the next week or so. I will let you know when the show is available on those platforms. You can also watch now on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you so much for being with us. I know it was a long show. I know it was kind of a heavy topic, but I think it was a really important one to address. And I will see you back here next week. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend.